Andy, thank you so much for joining me. You are a best-selling author and one of the most important and impactful journalists in the U.S. space. You're not in the U.S., but in this U.S. space today. And I think something you have a direct experience with that a lot of people don't have is the way that media can warp reality about you as an individual. That's something that you've endured for many years, particularly on Wikipedia. And that's what I wanted to start talking to you about today, which is how Wikipedia has distorted your own story. So, can you just tell us a little bit about what happened on Wikipedia and how that played out?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me on and sharing those kind words. I it's a bit hard for me to sometimes accept compliments that some people give about my work just because I have been, I guess I would say, gaslit about even myself because of things like Wikipedia and what others have written about me. Not in the sense that there's truth to what they say, but rather when one is um, surrounded by that type of negative propaganda all the time. I think, for introspective people, I'm pretty introspective. I began to think, am I not seeing something about myself that others are? And it happened pretty quickly. I uh, started my journalism career around 2017, but I was a non-figure in the public space for a couple of years. I would say it wasn't really until probably 2019, after the Antifa beating in Portland, Oregon, the one that involved the punches to the head and the milkshakes that was widely photographed and partially caught on video. That was how most people had heard of me outside of Portland. For a couple of years before then, I was a very local figure in my reporting on the violent far left and Antifa. And sometimes I went on Fox News and I had contributed some pieces to the Wall Street Journal, but otherwise I wasn't really known. But once my name was reported because of the attack, and even liberal mainstream media covered it, I went on CNN at that time. New York Times wrote about it, and they showed a picture of me with the injuries and with the drinks thrown all over me. Then I saw that there was a very quick, coordinated effort by journalists and writers all over in media, particularly in the online media space, like online news publications that lean left or are left wing, wrote all these hit pieces about me with quite spurious claims and horrific accusations that were sourced anonymously. And then this was used as citations in my Wikipedia. And, most people at that time, and many people now, may not know the name Andy Ngo. So naturally what they do is they go to Google, they enter it in, and they search. And then, the first thing you see it's a Wikipedia entry or a Google AI summary now, which pulls from these articles that I just referenced and Wikipedia. And it accuses me of being a far-right provocateur, agitator, and all these other lies. And it's 2025 now, so it's been many, many years since this unmaking of a person, of me, happened. But whenever I think about it, it still feels a little bit unbelievable. I've talked about this experience in my first book, Unmasked, and I have a big feeling of like an injustice was committed, and there's it feels like there's not much I can do about it, and that's been a bit hard because my work is not meant to be partisan. I do reporting, crime reporting primarily on far left violent extremists, and for the effort to expose that and potentially for something to be done, like it really requires the engagement of liberals and moderates. And because of how my reputation has been falsely maligned, I've had a lot of difficulty reaching that audience. I think that has a lot to do with the intention of this effort of making me disreputable, extremist, and all these other lies, because they didn't want my reporting to make an impact nationally.
So what did you see appear on the Wikipedia article about you? When did you start to notice this change?
I don't know when the Wikipedia entry on me started. I assume probably around 2019. When I read it, it was upsetting, and I felt helpless in the sense that I couldn't go in and make corrections, and there wasn't really an editor I could email and say, hey, this and that is inaccurate, or that. And it was a bit eye-opening in a way too, like how the ideas are laundered. For example, one thing that you'll see in the Wikipedia entry is it talks about this accusation that I was party to, or part of this conspiracy in Portland to beat up Antifa, which was completely false. And it started by a writer for a very far left alternative newspaper. I would call it a blog, called the Portland Mercury, which is a sister paper of The Stranger in Seattle. So for people who are in the Pacific Northwest, if you're kind of familiar with the politics, it's very far left, extreme, I would say. Like, these are like propagandas for violent extremist type of causes. And Alex Zelinsky, who was a news writer there at the time, interviewed somebody under a pseudonym and about a May Day protest that I covered. And he made these allegations, and there was like a video that he released that purported, in the summary of the story, if you watch the video, it's very different, that he believed that I was part of this conspiracy where there was this brawl outside this Antifa pub. Right-wingers showed up, and Rose City Antifa was having an event there, and there was a brawl in the street. I got assaulted in that event. So to see it spun where I wasn't a victim of an assault that day anymore, but I was somehow an aggressor based on lies. I was never reached for comment about that, which is very unethical. The whole piece is about me, defaming me. And she quoted somebody pseudonymously. So I didn't even at that time know who the accuser was. When I reviewed his footage, and I was like, oh, I remember that guy who was recording. He was just some guy with the camera there. Like, I was a guy on the camera on the street. And that piece, then, the claims in that piece have been laundered in like multiple other places. I think Salon and a whole bunch. You can go back and look. And it's a big part of the Wikipedia entry. And people still now make passing reference. My critics and my detractors make references to it, or like this. They just throw it out kind of randomly that I was this violent thug somehow. A lie. And it was like, well, I mean, what does somebody do in that situation? You have somebody making a false accusation under a pseudonym. It was published essentially in an online blog. And then it's just cited in a Wikipedia entry, and it's just there all the time. So I learned pretty quickly in 2019 that there wasn't really much I could do to try to convince the left or liberals to give me a chance or to like me, which was disappointing, actually, because I was naive at the time. I think early on in my journalism career, I thought that even if they didn't like some of the views that I took in some of the commentary pieces I wrote about, for example, I was early on very critical of the riotous behavior of BLM and Antifa in Portland. There are people who are supportive of that. They don't like my view, fine. But I thought, as long as I conducted myself professionally and let my journalism speak for itself, either through the writings and or primarily the video. That's why I did so much video. I didn't like doing commentary. I wanted people to see what was happening, and then they can draw their own conclusions from the footage itself. They don't have to see my commentary, my spin. And I was made out to be this villain, I think in part because the videos were quite eye-opening for a lot of people. And Yeah, it's a big regret that I have. I feel I don't know really, looking back of how much I could have done to have changed the course of all this, but it makes me a bit sad still when I reflect on it. It does, because there's a lot of people who maybe they're not radical left, but they just do spend a couple minutes looking into who I am on Google, and then that's the impression they have, and
Right.
it really. Then I'm just dismissed outright, and that unfortunately has happened a lot.
So do you think that when this got transferred over into Wikipedia, did that make a difference in public perception? Was there a difference between it being on Wikipedia and being on all the other various online sources?
Yes, because I noticed that the certain phrases of biased phrases against me that are used in the Wikipedia entry were then very often repeated in articles that smeared me. Like it used some of the same like lines, few sentences.
So they were pulling from the Wikipedia
Yeah.
entry, then sort of reverse engineering the attack.
Yes, and anytime I read hit pieces about me, which there aren't very many now, but 2019, 2020, 2021, like I read it and I could tell like this author is not familiar with my work at all, has never read it, hasn't read my book, and I can tell what they did read was Wikipedia. Because they reference the same hit points, and then the way they even use some of the same terms, literally.
So it became like this kind of like Oppo research dossier almost on you. It's like anyone who wanted to attack could just go to your Wikipedia article, and it's all there for them to find not just the attack points, but also the quote unquote sourcing.
Yes, but like it's can I swear on this?
Yeah.
It's a shit dossier. Like
Yeah.
one thing I just remember now that was actually quite surprising to me was how on my Wikipedia entry and on other actually entries of figures that are perhaps perceived as controversial, that people's opinions from various columns or essays are then used as citations.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yes.
some random left-wing person's opinion of me is then cited as like evidence of something. Like that was actually quite surprising to me. Although I've learned now that that's one way the ideas get laundered. Like it doesn't matter if it's a news article or essentially a blog post, somebody's opinion. Like it can be cited, and many editors at Wikipedia just allow that just because it went in some publication online.
As long as it's on the right side of the political spectrum, that's the key. Like, so if it's coming from the left, if it's an opinion piece, it gets admitted into evidence. If it's coming from the right, even if it's a news article, it somehow doesn't. That's the Wikipedia modus operandi.
Yeah, I think if you read my Wikipedia entry, I haven't looked at it in quite a long time. I realized it was useless. Like, why read it and become distressed? It's like there's nothing I can do. I just move on. But Robbie Suave, who is at that time was an editor at Reason magazine, he did a deep dive on this accusation. He was the only journalist who did. I really appreciate it. I'm always indebted to him for that because he did. Reason is not a partisan publication. He watched this video. It's like damning video shows Andy part of this far right conspiracy, and he's like, there's no, like, it doesn't show any of the things how others have characterized it on Twitter in these viral posts or in that article. And so he wrote an article, and he reached out to the author of the original piece for comment, and she didn't really have much to say to defend her work, of course. That, as far as in my last checking, it was never referenced as a counterpoint to like this part of my Wikipedia of these accusations.
Yes. So I did a little digging into the Wikipedia article itself and found that there's primarily two editors who are really going after you in the article and fighting. So what we don't see behind the scenes of a Wikipedia article are the talk pages where they're duking it out. And two of the editors, both of them are the top editors on the article, are fighting very hard and have been fighting very hard. One of them is called Note Duck, and the other one's called Cedar 777. Cedar 777 is from Seattle Piers, and is associated with sort of left-wing, far-left causes. But these guys are actually fighting really hard to insert these various smears, calling you a provocateur, saying you've been discredited, and fighting to have your categorization as a journalist removed. They really don't want to call you a journalist. And lo and behold, that's what appears on Google when you Google your name. Why do you think they're doing this? And who do you think they are? And what agenda does this serve?
Well, one, it's a bit distressing that all these people are working under aliases. We don't even know who they are, when the public should know, actually, because I bet you, if we looked into the backgrounds, you see that these are highly biased, partisan, ideologically motivated individuals, and you see it reflected through their on-record work. Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Who do you think these people are that are coming after you because they're putting so much energy into fighting these battles that are battles to defame and smear you? That's really what they're doing. Who do you think they are? Why do you think they're doing this? And what's the agenda here?
I think, like these two editors and a whole cabal of activists, writers, some of them identify as journalists, I would say that they have this political agenda of making sure the public is kept disinformed about the threat of far-left extremism. Mm-hmm. And anybody who shows up and is effective in exposing that must be destroyed by any means necessary. These writers do it through trying to destroy my reputation so that, again, if anybody looks me up, this is what they're presented with. And this includes many of the liberal producers, by the way, who are on mainstream liberal media. They won't have me on. Like, these are people who are not familiar with my work, so they look me up and they see that and they're like, oh, well, we can't have them on. That's part of it. Two, there are those who believe in taking militant direct action. This is the MO of Antifa, and I've unfortunately have been a victim of that in a really, really brutal way that I think would have permanently silenced a lot of people in this space. I was working as an independent journalist. I didn't have institutional support, and to be beaten so severely that I had a traumatic brain injury and needed months of therapy in hospital to address the cognitive deficiencies. I didn't have any institutional support. I was actually really, 2019 was really hard, and it feels a little weird for me to talk about sort of the emotional impact of it. It's an old story. It's 6 years ago, but there was so much that was kind of just left unresolved from it. I've talked at length before about how I didn't receive any justice, so that's the most glaring part. But a second part of it was like sort of the people that provided that context in re-victimizing me. They've continued to sort of fail upwards, working, some of them, like Alex Zelinsky, for example. I mentioned her earlier. She was the one who wrote the piece for the Portland Mercury. Portland Mercury is just this leftist free rag that people take and throw away. But then she found another position working at OPB, which is the NPR affiliate in the state of Oregon. So now she has sort of like an institutional legitimacy, and her salary is paid by taxpayers. So, and she's just one of many. I think of like Jared Holt. He was with Right Wing Watch, which is a partisan leftist nonprofit group, and he was a blogger for them, and he's been able now to fail upwards writing for I forget the name of the bigger nonprofit, the so-called counter-extremism nonprofit that he's at. So just numerous examples of people like that. They get rewarded for doing these type of things.
So when you think about Wikipedia as a so-called source of reliable information, What do you have to say to people out there who still see it that way?
It's, in a way, I don't blame them, in the sense that, like, for me, if there's like a concept that I'm unfamiliar with, an idea of a person as well, the first thing I do is if I'm in a rush, then I'll just quickly look on Safari on my iPhone, and Wikipedia is the top thing that shows up, and it'll give me a little brief summary of who they are. Of course, I know if I'm looking up somebody that's controversial, perhaps, then it needs way more research than just reading Wikipedia. But that's just sort of the convenience, and that's how insidious Wikipedia is in its relationship with Google as well, and in sort of like a shaping the information landscape. It has this sort of dominance in allegedly summarizing topics or individuals, and it's why it's a big target of leftist ideologues in sort of that takeover. Although I don't know, going further back, if Wikipedia had always been so biased. My recollection from using it, when I was a young adult and teenager, that it didn't seem that way. But maybe I just wasn't aware. My experience, like most people, don't go through what I went through or what the experience of a conservative public figure goes through. So, on many other articles and subjects, it's completely fine. But anything political, it's like, whoa.
What do you think needs to change about Wikipedia or about the information system that we rely on today?
Well, I don't think Wikipedia will be diminished in any way going forward. It's reached a certain point in how people use it that it's like too big to fail, I think. So what should happen is that there needs to be more rigorous enforcement of neutral point of view. That's allegedly part of its mandate, at least on paper, and I don't think it's fulfilling that. And there's bad leadership in place. I mean, just reminds me of just remembering the CEO of NPR, Ms. Maher. She was head of Wikimedia, right?
Yes.
She's been on record with some of the most unhinged, woke ideas, and again, this theme of failing upwards. And now she's running a partially publicly funded news and media organization. You can just see there's not really checks and balances in place. That's the problem, I think. So as I live in London now, and I hear and see all the criticisms of the BBC, but they do have certain checks and balances in place when impartiality is violated. People might not like the outcome of the investigations that they have on themselves and their staff, but at least they do something.
Right. Like
NPR and Wikipedia, all these other places, do they do any of that? No. So this whole so-called commitment to straight news or neutrality is a farce with them. They don't pretend otherwise.
Correct. Yeah. Wikipedia has arbitration committee, which is their Supreme Court. It's really the only decision-making body for this kind of internal investigations. And there's, I think, around, let's say, 10 active arbitrators, members of the committee, for 7 million articles. So you can just do the math. It's physically, literally impossible for them to be able to provide those checks and balances. And then we have the Jimmy Wales effect, which is that Jimmy Wales is the self-declared monarch of Wikipedia. He's been called by the New York Times dictator for life of Wikipedia. He still has up until 2023, he could overrule every single decision made on the site by any other person, including arbitration committee. He had total control. He only recently lost that, but his influence is still enormous. And this is what was governing and what is still governing our information ecosystem. And it's not just about Google, even though Google ranks every single Wikipedia article number one on any topical search result, but it's also about AI, because this is all getting fed into AI, all getting fed into ChatGPT, into Gemini, into almost every major AI model is training on Wikipedia to a disproportionate extent. So I think the question I have to wrap up the Wikipedia thing, do you feel like Wikipedia is part of the same activist network that has been working to target you for so many years? Do you feel like it's all part of the same ecosystem?
Yes. On the articles that are politicized.
Aside from the smears and defamation, let's say, what makes you say that, right? Because it's not the exact same people, right? It's not the person from the Mercury who's now Wikipedia. Maybe it is, but what gives you that indication?
Well, if you look at who's being cited, whose work is being cited, whose voices are being cited, they come from one side. And there's like no effort to even shed sort of context on some of these citations. Like, you know, you just see a number, a footnote.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like, for example, I think most people have not heard of the Portland Mercury, for example. So you see, oh, it's cited, but then you have no idea what the Portland Mercury is. You might think it's just like a local Portland paper without actually knowing it's actually a very openly far left publication.
Right.
Like, that's context that's relevant. You're not going to see that in a footnote that's just a URL.
Yes.
And if you see systematically in an article that's like referencing opinions of leftist figures, it's like, well, okay, like, you know, maybe they do have something to say or provide certain insight on a particular person or subject that's important in the site. But if it systematically only goes in one way and in a negative way, like, that's evidence of bias that's being built in. And the average person, most people, are not going to do that type of review of the so-called citation and evidence. They read what's on it, and that helps inform their opinion. So
it's like a giant hack. It's like this backdoor vulnerability into our information ecosystem. Nobody knows better, and everybody trusts it.
Yeah, and that's really scary. I feel like all of us are kind of helpless.
Yeah.
I wish I had a better answer when you asked me, what do you think can be done? I don't really have a good, I mean, you know, what I proposed about like, oh, better checks and balances. Yeah, are they really going to implement that on themselves? No. So where does that leave us? It leaves us at where we've been and where we are and where we're going.
I think it leaves us as journalists with the sort of imperative to look at this thing, Wikipedia, that we've all just kind of accepted as part of our lives, like furniture, and actually investigate it. But I think for people out there, we're getting to this point where we were maybe 4 or 5 years ago with the mainstream media, where people are like, I'm not so sure about this. And then there was this real turning point around the time that you were active. COVID, BLM, Antifa, where the media is just telling flat out lies that we can see with our own eyes are fake, are lies. And I think we're getting to that point with Wikipedia where there's like a bubbling up of consciousness and awareness around this thing and what it really is.
I'm glad that you're optimistic. I'm I guess the reason why I feel a bit that waking up effect, I think, is amongst people who are politically informed and online a lot.
Yeah.
And the normie is just not that.
Right.
However, and the reason why I think the declining trust in social media, in legacy media, is different in that it's I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. Is that normies are still online and on social media, so they're going to be seeing these alternative voices and news sites or stories in a way that it's just however, the normies are still using these search engines, and now more of them are using AI and Wikipedia.
So they're not, meaning they don't even have sort of a menu of options to choose from the way that they do have with regard to news on social media.
Yes, in a passive way, though. Yeah.
They're just being fed it without knowing that it's even there.
Yes.
It's like if you're hooked up, you got something hooked up to you intravenously and someone's just pushing through whatever they want, you have no idea what it is.
Yeah, whereas, there's like passive consumption by normies of social media where they do get exposed to, like, a lot of the people who became aware of Antifa was they just like randomly saw some of my videos, and it made them aware of, like, oh, like, that's quite different than the way what I saw on legacy media or what I read. And it opened up a little bit of, like, viewing or understanding that they had been misled by legacy media. It's hard for me to see that same type of effect happening with normies, because when people are being presented with, like, the biases of Wikipedia and, like, screenshots, and for the people to kind of understand that, I think you have to have already been, it's like a smaller subset of the population who's already attuned to the general issues with, legacy or institutional mainstream sources of information.
So for you, when you decided to pick up that camera and go out onto the street, let's say the first time, or maybe there wasn't exactly a first time, but sort of the general idea, I think for a lot of people that is such a scary idea that they would never do it.
There was a first time for me.
And what was that like, and what made you actually get over the fear and go out there and do it?
It was November 2016, election night, and in Portland. And by late evening, people had a suspicion that Hillary had lost, because it wasn't the results that were coming in the other states wasn't overwhelmingly for Hillary. So people began rioting. I was assigned by an editor-in-chief when I was working at the student newspaper at Portland State to go out and document it. And I, myself, not feeling very confident in just going out with a notebook and taking notes for an article, I was going to get some video as well. I thought I could put it on the student newspaper website. So that was really my first time doing that type of coverage. And I didn't know how violent it would get. So when I went out and did it, there wasn't initially fear, but then when seeing the rioters, which I later learned was Antifa, starting fires and breaking things, and police responding with flashbangs and all that, that was quite terrifying. But I remember the legacy media coverage the day after and every day after for years was to downplay the violence that had just happened and to give some type of sympathetic coverage and legitimacy to the so-called fears of the rioters themselves on the left who hate Trump. I was really troubled by that, because it's like, why is our media providing cover to these thugs who in one night did $1 million in damage because they're election deniers? So I was like, well, I should probably go out again and record more videos so people can kind of see, like, this wasn't just like some small brief outburst of violence that happened. It was actually a large group of people who were embedded in a larger protest and was protected by that larger protest, carrying out acts of intimidation on the public, anti-democratic intimidation. And so I just kept doing it, and I didn't notice a lot of the signs of the threats building up against me. I was naive, to be honest. And then I paid a heavy price a few years later.
So, at the time I could understand a little bit why the media would sort of shirk its duty to cover this stuff because it was a major story. There was this anti-Trump derangement, as we know, but it seems like they've clung on to this refusal to cover Antifa and to investigate and to actually expose it the way they would for something on the right or something that's just in a different political perspective. Why have they still failed to do any of this kind of journalism? Why are they still protecting Antifa?
For many years now, the journalism departments at universities have been captured by ideologically motivated academics in communications and journalism. I mean, I saw a little bit of it in my student media training when I was at Portland State. Like, we had to go to these mandatory trainings that it was DEI training. They didn't use that word, but it was like, well, think about how your coverage can affect marginalized groups. Who's the oppressor? Who's the oppressed? Islamophobia, like all these type of things. And this was just student media training at a not very good university. You can imagine how much more intense it must be at the universities that produce the journalists that do go into the big newsrooms in DC and in New York City. And institutionally, when you have, general replacement of the journalists with these new ones, and then the new ones become the editors and then higher up, it's just like the whole institution becomes ideologically pegged to one side. And because it's so systematic throughout it, the people there don't even realize it. I think probably for most of them, they're not thinking of themselves as being political activists. But when you're sort of surrounded in the space where everybody views things the same way, you don't, like, your bias is not even, you don't even recognize it. So that's, you see that in the news coverage in print, and you see it, of course, in broadcast coverage. Broadcast coverage is particularly egregious. And I'm in the UK now, and when I watch American news, I hate how they bring on these commentators that are like so inflammatory and extreme. I guess maybe they're just thinking from a business standpoint that it's good for ratings. Yes. It's like, it's like such a lowest common denominator type of analysis, the type of people that they bring on MSNBC. But for the MSNBC audience, NBC audience, and many Democrat viewers, they watch them. They think it's sort of normal of how to debate these various issues. So we have crap media in America. We really do. I know BBC gets a lot of crap, but they would not have that type of caliber of guests that they would invite on the BBC. Even when they have the two sides, it's of a much higher intellectual level than what we see in America. I hate this dumbing down in America of broadcast publication, and of course in print as well, now that there are so many of these online publications or smaller print publications like Mother Jones. I don't know if people are familiar with what its editor-in-chief says on the record on social media. It's like, this is a person who runs a news publication. This type of leftist unhinged shit that she's saying, it's like, it's a shame that she's not embarrassed. Like, I would, if I was in this position of being an editor-in-chief, I would not be putting my political views out in a way that would embarrass the people who work, under my leadership. But in that space, you can fail upwards and get rewarded for leftist extremism, which is why a lot of the violent Antifa rioters who end up being even convicted, they can go on and still develop careers and live like a normal life in public.
Yes. And there's kind of an overlap with that phenomenon in academia, where I see academics who are at prestigious universities on the left saying the most unhinged stuff in the most profane terms, the most coarse, ugly discourse imaginable on social media, while they're professors at these so-called esteemed universities. And it's the same kind of effect that you see in the media. They can get away with that and can still be considered respectable.
They get invited on.
Yeah.
They write for legacy publications. Yes, it's the exact
That's right.
same phenomenon. It's the left has power in these institutions, and they reward their radicals. They really
Right.
do.
Right.
That doesn't happen on the right. I'm not saying it should happen. It's just saying, in legacy place institutions or publications that are conservative, if somebody's revealed to have extreme views, like, they are expunged from that.
Yes.
Some call that cancel culture. I think it's really important actually to, like, if you welcome it, and then you sort of excuse it, and then it starts changing the culture of the institution. So it's actually really important, in my opinion, to not welcome like radical extremist views within institutions that play a very important role. I'm not calling for censorship like in public spaces. I'm referring specifically to institutions that have a really important role in public. Academia is important. Journalism is so important. And unfortunately, a lot of the institutions that are old and have a lot of power and prestige are doing a lot of harm.
It's like this case of Taylor Lorenz praising a murderer, Luigi, and then after that being invited on CNN to talk about this. You're coming out affirming the actions of a actual literal murderer. If that is not the moral line of someone who's just crossed over, I don't know what is. I really don't. And still gets invited onto CNN for a special feature interview, to me is absolutely bonkers. It's something that you can't understand, having been raised in a sort of a little bit of a different news environment than what we have today.
Taylor Lorenz is another example of the failing upwards, because she was at Washington Post, then New York Times. Is that right?
I think it was the other way around.
And where was she before? It was much smaller affiliation.
She had been at, I think at Business Insider, I believe. And she had also she did something at the Daily Mail. I think it might have actually been social media management at the Daily Mail. But I'm not 100% sure on her CV.
So anyways, my point is, there's this trajectory to, like, I mean, you don't go any higher in American print publications than Washington Post and New York Times. Like, to have, and she's been controversial for a very long time. These things that she's been saying now that some people are aware of in the last year it's not like sudden. There's been like history of other quite, and I would say like unethical behavior as somebody who identifies as a journalist. And whoever hired her editors and all that were likely all aware of that, and she was welcome on. Ultimately, it was too much for them, and which is why she's independent now. And she's shown her full colors, which is now, support for alleged murderers and other really extreme views. I think there are a lot of journalists who are very similar, like Lorenz, just they're a bit smarter in hiding their radicalism, so they remain at institutions and are more indirect in how their influence is exerted.
So when we're on the topic of Antifa, I think for a lot of people, they think about this something that sort of that peaked in the time frame you were involved, 2019, 2020, 2021. But I get the feeling that that's actually not quite true. So what's going on with Antifa today? Where are we? What's the evolution? And what do you think is the threat level?
Antifa in the American context was a fringe movement that's a couple of decades old. It's existed particularly more so within anarchist punk subculture, and they're a lot of it was around the punk music scene and the sort of misfits of society that would hang out in cities and read these type of zines and these anarchist zines and call themselves anti-fascist, anti-racist. They received huge propaganda boost in mainstreaming after the election win of Donald Trump, where people, their stated idea and MO of not relying on the institutions of the country to protect people, to get justice or for safety, law enforcement, prosecutors, courts, etc. They argue that all these institutions are illegitimate. America is a systematically racist, white supremacist, fascist regime.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we need to take our own actions, they call it direct action, and protect ourselves and protect our people. So they are particularly, they have this view, which many liberals actually espouse, that words can be violence. So therefore, and thoughts can be violence as well. So if somebody espouses views that they hate, disagree with, they think it's fair game to enact physical violence against them and actually either kill them or encourage others to kill them or encourage them to kill themselves. So I view the movement really as a death cult. They are obsessed with death, killing people, encouraging suicide, and they believed in armed militancy as well. So there's a faction of them that take up firearms training, not because they're Second Amendment enthusiasts. It's actually because they believe that they need weapons either to kill their targets or to kill law enforcement if they were ever put in that type of situation where they needed to respond. So what happened in Portland was that extremism was embraced as a legitimate resistance to the first Trump administration. So you just had this normalization of violence on the streets, Trump supporters being beaten, U.S. flag waving people who came into Portland from the neighboring areas being brutally assaulted. And anytime the police responded to try to separate the sides, the police were called fascist. Mayor, who's also the police commissioner in Portland, would come out to condemn police. And then to the point where police just then stayed away. So what happened is people were getting assaulted regularly. I unfortunately was one of the many victims, and somebody was killed in 2020. 2020 was the year of the George Floyd attempted revolution, and Antifa used that moment of anti-American sentiment and the mass protests to embed themselves in it and enact extensive violence and killing and maimings of people and property destruction. And there still has been no accounting of how much financial destruction that did across the U.S. Like nobody's interested in
which is
doing
a
inquiry
media
about that.
like this would be like if it were any other group doing this, the media would have a journalistic task force. There would be the podcasts and the infographics and the analyses and all the kind of things that are essential to understanding something as complex and impactful as Antifa. And it just was not there. There was basically one guy, who is you, covering this entire story for years.
Yeah, and it was a big burden. There's only so much I can do, and I tried my best to cover like sort of the bigger picture and all these things that were happening, not just in Portland, but Seattle and elsewhere. I mean, I want people to remember that in 2020, in July, a big part of the major city was taken over by these militants in Seattle. They called it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. It's like they drove police away from the police station there, and they just took over and they set up checkpoints with armed guards. Like this happened in a major American city, and the way it was covered was like this, like this peaceful,
like a commune.
commune where people came out to support one another, free food, free this, free that, community support. And then they had all these shootings that happened because all these thugs and criminals naturally went there because it was a police-free zone. You know, police, they had these checkpoints in where police couldn't go in, first responders couldn't go in. And there were multiple shootings and several people were murdered there. There was all this violence that happened. I was undercover. That is still surreal when I think about it. It's a long time ago, but I think about it and it's like, wow, that happened. So Antifa are effective really only in opposition to anything. So they had the George Floyd moment in 2020 when that began to fade out. By 2021, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Joe Biden won. So, you know, Democrats weren't so keen on inciting political unrest anymore because their guy was in power now.
Right.
So in the years after that, Antifa's tactics have changed towards these unannounced attacks on infrastructure, businesses, property, like setting police cars on fire, breaking into businesses, setting a bridge on fire. And then they would announce it after the attack on their various anarchist blogs, supposed to claim a responsibility like terrorist groups do. And these don't get any coverage at all in the mainstream press, like at all. Like when I post about it on my X, like I'm like the only one who's brings any attention to these claims or responsibilities. Attacks on politicians. There's so many like really like I'm surprised it's not a story. It's like you have these extremists who are doing these type of attacks on elections office that happened most recently this year in Sonoma County, where Portland is. You had these mass thugs smash up the Sonoma County elections office. We had all, you know, this is in the context of months of talking about attacks on democracy and the threat it faces. You have these mass thugs come in and destroy the office and leave their anarchist graffiti symbols so people knew who it was. No national coverage at all. To this day, months later, 6 months later, nobody's been arrested over that. Ballot boxes in the Portland area and in neighboring Vancouver, Washington were set on fire and ballots were destroyed. And a message was found, free Gaza. Nobody's been arrested over that. It's just like, you know, there's this like.
But what explains that? I mean, because if you could say one of the institutions completely fell down on their duty, with maybe the media or maybe the police, but both at the same time.
I don't think police in those instances failed. I mean, police put out press statements in terms of getting the information out. What failed was the media and, of course, the local politicians. I think once it immediately emerged that there was a left-wing political angle, allegedly, to the attacks, the local mayors, local city council was not particularly keen in highlighting that this was an issue in their own jurisdiction. So those type of attacks, and then I'm speaking to you a day after a Antifa gunman in Texas, who was a Texas most wanted fugitive, was just apprehended, Benjamin Song. He is the 14th person who's been arrested over a shooting ambush in Alvarado, Texas on an ICE facility. So there's been all these attacks on federal property, ICE agents, threats against them, death threats, people crowdsourcing not just pictures of the agents, but their alleged names, where they live, who they're married to, who their children are, and their addresses. And people are posting this online just for whoever to do something, posting this in flyers around places like Portland. And so this is kind of more of where the Antifa actions have grown to. It's like, it's these direct actions because, yes, they would like to riot like they did in 2020, but they've struggled getting that same type of momentum. They had a little bit of it in LA, although LA was a bit different with the, I call it an insurrection uprising there against ICE. LA had was heavily characterized by Mexican nationalism. So it was different than what we've seen previously with like BLM joining with Antifa and such. So the movement it's a domestic terrorist movement, international terrorist movement, but I'm just focusing on the American part, like you've We've had now this ambush shooting where an officer was shot in the neck. And I've seen no coverage at all on CNN, NBC, MSNBC about this pretty big case in Texas. I mean, everyone in Texas and then also in Oklahoma received an alert on their mobile phones about Benjamin Song when he was a fugitive for almost a week. Like, that's a big story.
So what do you think is the risk Antifa poses today? And what's the consequence? What might be the consequence of this national news blackout that we're experiencing on this topic?
The threat from Antifa is not so much revolution as is their ultimate goal, but rather how they are part of the end of this spear by Democrats and Democrat elected officials. I want to make clear, I'm not saying that Antifa and the Democrat Party are the same. They're very, very, very different. Antifa are communist anarchists. They hate liberals. They hate Democrats. Ideologically, they are not the same. They are not officially linked, but Democrats in jurisdictions where they have power and through their own incitement create avenues for Antifa to come in and act as foot soldiers. Portland has had now 6 weeks of violent attacks on the local ICE office. And this is all because every Democrat in office there in Oregon, like the rest of the West Coast, is run entirely by Democrats, have been inciting hatred, violent hatred against the U.S. government in an insurrection, and particularly towards immigration officials. And so it's not Democrat officials who are going out and violently attacking the ICE facility, but they're creating this environment where people feel emboldened to show up and feel that they would be supported by those on the city council, and media as well. Local media is just staying away from this nightly attack on the ICE office. If they go there at all, they're there during the day and they interview people about why they're protesting for immigrant rights. Like, it's that, misframing that happens. We're all used to it now. Lies. So that's the danger of Antifa. It's like they themselves are not dangerous enough to cause a lot of damage, but rather they have to sort of operate within a system where they're emboldened.
So it's like a symbiosis with like the Democratic Party. When it suits when the causes align, they come in as the muscle.
Yes. And the violent actions, for example, that happened outside the ICE facility in North Texas, I think if something like that had happened with an attack on a local property, like in Oregon, like let's say on a police station, which happened a lot in 2020, you wouldn't be seeing this type of like attempted murder charges like we're seeing in Texas. Like, you have a whole alleged cell that's being dismantled. They're charged with 3 counts of attempted murder, 3 felonies, 3 more felony counts of use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. They're charged locally in that county, which is a conservative county, Johnson County, Texas, with terrorism and other, which is what should happen based on the accusations.
Don't mess with Texas.
Exactly. In Portland, Seattle, you have this revolving door of these rioters who they get let out, their cases are dropped, or even if they're convicted through pleading guilty. There's just an announcement that just came out this week in Portland. A man named Darrell Kimberlin, who was convicted in 2022 of carrying out a series of very violent Antifa attacks. He's a member of Antifa. I've seen him when I was undercover. He pleaded guilty. He was part of a militant Antifa group that attacked the Democrat Party headquarters in 2020. Interesting how when Democrats are attacked by far-left extremists, they are too timid to actually bring attention to it. Mm-hmm. Attacked other numerous businesses and property. He was convicted in a plea deal, and it was a sweetheart plea deal. He pleaded guilty to first-degree rioting, or felony rioting, I should say. and criminal mischief, and his other felony charges were dropped as part of that deal. He had 18 months of probation, so no jail time, and $50,000 in restitution, which is a significant amount. Well, a judge in Multnomah County last week agreed to reduce his felony conviction to misdemeanor, which then, under Oregon state law, means that later on this year, he can petition the court to have the conviction set aside or expunged completely from his record. Okay. And this is one of the most violent Antifa rioters from the 2020 era in Portland. So,
and who funds the legal effort?
Oh, great question. That opens up a whole nother discussions. There are whole networks of highly ideologically motivated attorneys and those who work within the legal sphere who are far left extremists themselves and are only in the career of being a criminal defense attorney because they want to protect the far left violent extremists on their side who have been arrested. I would say the NLG, National Lawyers Guild, and affiliated type of similar groups that exist. There's so many of them. NLG is a big one because it's a national one and they have chapters across the US. They're probably most known for sending in their members wearing these green hats that say NLG to be so-called legal observers at these riots. And one of their members who's also an SPLC staffer, Thomas Jurgen, is accused in the state of Georgia of domestic terrorism and RICO crimes as part of the Stop Cop City Antifa movement and attacks on critical infrastructure. So that case is still ongoing, by the way. So NLG, very extreme. They provide pro bono legal aid, cash, bail support.
Who pays them?
They have donors because these are nonprofits. And in Oregon, there's a very similar group. It's part of sort of that same network that operates locally called the I'll start that over. In Oregon, there's a nonprofit that does the same thing for particularly Oregon-related cases. In fact, in my civil case against Rose City Antifa et al., that group represented the defendants in that case, pro bono. So there's so much money coming from donors, and not like one big donor. Like, there's a lot of people who, conspiracy theorists, or maybe just people who just think that, you know, there's like one or two people pulling the strings of everything. It doesn't work like that on the far left. George Soros is a very big role in sort of what his philanthropy work, all the causes it funds and what it does, but it's not like nobody's getting Soros cash. It doesn't work like that in terms of being a rioter and getting paid. So I want to, you know, one thing I would say to people on the right who have strong views on this issue is like, it really hurts reporting on, it hurts the work of those who are bringing light to far left extremism when you share hypotheses and theories that are not based on anything. It's like just hyperbolic and just throwing out, you know, rioters are getting paid by somebody, and it's like, well, who and what's your evidence? It's like, it's rioters are not getting cash. How it works is more so they're getting support in other ways: legal aid, food, can be accommodation, travel. That stuff is like documented, and there's evidence of that, a lot of it, and like a trail of it. But in terms of like, nobody's getting paid cash to come out this night and riot. And so any time people share this type of theories, it ends up, then all of the work just sort of gets dismissed as like, you know, like we're all kooks or something. And so
you've been assaulted, you've been defamed, you've been maligned, and you're still going. So what is it that keeps you going? You could probably do a lot of other things in the world. Why do you continue to do what you do?
I continue doing what I do because I've been so fortunate that there are people who find that my work has value. And I say that I have a lot of humility in the following that I have, because there are so many talented journalists out there, independent journalists who work day in and day out so hard, and they, for whatever reasons, they don't build up a following. And it's not a reflection of the quality of their work. It's just sometimes that luck doesn't happen, you know. One outcome of the beating of me is that in 2019 and then in 2021 is that's the first time a lot of people had heard of me. And I had that, you know, that horrible experience which changed my life and resulted in me having to completely leave the US altogether with all the violent threats. I couldn't waste the blessing that I had as a result of that, in the sense of, in something so horrific, then people started following my work and saying, like, maybe there's something a bit more to what Andy has to say, or maybe his videos, his writings are worth reading and watching. And so I feel like I have this sort of obligation that, like, I was lucky to survive it, and given a second opportunity, a second chance at life, I have to continue. So it's this sense of duty that I have to the truth. And so I try to remind myself all the time to be grateful for what I have. Sometimes I feel down, you know, it feels not very good to see how I can be maligned at times. It's can be demoralizing, I'll admit. But then I remember the people who've come out to support me, the people who donated to my medical fund at that time. Like, I can't turn my back on all that and, you know, just go into a different career or something.
Yeah.
And it's been hard, but it's a duty that I do with gratitude.
So I know most people out there are where they can find you on X, but where else can they find you right now?
I launched a Substack recently, nocomment.com, ngocomment.com.
Oh, nice.
It's where a lot of my reporting goes now, actually. I think X has been really useful in, you know, when you're trying to get out the main 3 points of a story, of a breaking story. But then there's a lot more to say.
Yeah.
And some people like writing really long posts. I find that that Twitter is not really the medium for that, and Substack is a place where people can support me. And then I'll just generally my work, and also, and for people to send news tips as well, as andy-ngo.com. So that's my website where you can see like all the links to my social media and my Substack and my contact form. Amazing.
I'm definitely going to be watching as it grows as a media watcher. I'm excited for that. So thank you, Andy, for being here, for telling your story, and I'm looking forward to the next time.
Thank you.